So this is the JBL Pulse 5. Now the Pulse 5 sounds good, but you are mainly paying for the light feature. But the light feature on the Pulse 5 is very impressive and it's very dynamic. But today we're going to see how the Pulse 5 stacks up to both the Sony XG300 and the Sony XE300. Because if you didn't know, technically the XG300 has a light feature.
Regarding pricing, the Pulse 5 has a retail price of $250, which I will admit is a little steep because with the Pulse 5, you're mainly paying for the light feature. Whereas with the Sony XG300, this speaker has a retail price of $350, but it can routinely be found on sale for $250. And then there's the XE300, which has a retail price of $200, but can routinely be found on sale for $150. If you want to pick any of these speakers up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch shelf down below. I've made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And if you've been watching me for a while, you know I can be very particular. So I'll only set my name on something that I'm really proud of. Now first, let's talk about the design of these speakers. Now both the Pulse 5 and XE300 are mid-size speakers, so they are both easy enough to take on the go with you. But the Pulse 5 does have this built-in loop, which means that you can hang it from places. Whereas with the XG300, this is a larger portable Bluetooth speaker. Now this isn't a speaker that you're going to want to carry around in your backpack, but it does have a built-in carrying handle, so the XG300 is also easy enough to take on the go with you. However, durability-wise, both of Sony's speakers have mostly fabric wrap bodies, and these fabric wrap bodies do a really good job of standing up to constant abuse from bumps and scrapes. Whereas the Pulse 5 has an acrylic body, and from my testing, I found that this acrylic body is a lot more durable than I expected. Now, you are going to get some deep scratches if you were to drop this speaker from 2 feet above the ground onto some pavement, but this acrylic body doesn't scratch easily if it's in your backpack, and it takes a lot of force to shatter this acrylic body. And all of these speakers are IP67 rated, meaning that if any of these speakers get wet, rained on, or dropped in a pool, they're all going to be fine. But now let's talk about the light features on these speakers. Now the XE300 doesn't have a light feature. Its predecessor did, but not this one. Whereas the XG300 does have a light feature, but this light feature is hidden in the passive radiators, and to be honest, it's very hard to see this light feature, and this light feature isn't all that impressive. So personally, I just turn off this light feature and I enjoy the battery life savings. Whereas with the Pulse 5, this light feature is a lot more impressive. It's a lot brighter, it's a lot more dynamic, and there are a lot more lighting styles to choose from. The light feature on the Pulse 5 is going to liven up your bedroom, or it's just going to look very cool outdoors at night. However, this light feature is a little hard to see during the daytime, but nonetheless, if you do decide to use this light feature, it is going to take its toll on the battery life.
Now, when it comes to battery life, the Pulse 5 has an advertised battery life of 12 hours. However, this advertised battery life of 12 hours is with this speaker playing at 50% volume. Real-world use with this speaker playing at 80% volume, which is a really good listening volume for indoor use. The Pulse 5 is good for about 6 to 7 hours of playback time. But then there are these other two Sony speakers. Now, the XG300 has an advertised battery life of 25 hours. However, this advertised battery life of 25 hours is with this speaker playing at 50% volume, with this light feature turned off, but with this mega bass feature turned on, which is good. However, 50% volume on this speaker is on the quieter side because this speaker does lean towards a very warm sound signature. But real-world use, if you were to use this speaker at 80% volume and with the light feature turned off and with this mega bass feature turned on, then it's good for about 11 hours of playback time, which is pretty impressive. And personally, I do recommend that you just use this speaker with this light feature turned off because it's very hard to see to begin with, and that way you're going to enjoy battery life savings. However, if you were to use this speaker at max volume and with the light feature turned on and with the mega bass feature turned on, then Sony is claiming an advertised battery life of 4 hours. And if you want to extend the battery life of this speaker past its advertised battery life of 25 hours, then you can always use it while in stamina mode. However, when this speaker is in stamina mode, that is going to automatically turn off the light feature and is going to turn off the mega bass feature. And so while in stamina mode, the speaker just sounds very flat, as in the speaker won't have a lot of bass to it. And then there's the Sony XE300. Now, the XE300 has an advertised battery life of 24 hours. However, this advertised battery life of 24 hours is with this speaker playing at 50% volume, which is really on the quiet side, and in general, the speaker doesn't get all that loud and it does have a warmer sound signature to it. But also, that's with the speaker playing while in stamina mode. And like I mentioned earlier, stamina mode is going to make this speaker sound very flat because it severely reduces its bass. But with stamina mode turned off, the speaker has an advertised battery life of 14 hours while it's playing at 50% volume. But real-world use with the speaker playing at 80% volume, then the speaker is good for about 8 hours of playback time. However, since 80% volume on this speaker is still on the quieter side, I expect most people to use this speaker at a higher volume on a regular basis, which is going to mean that the battery life on this speaker is going to run out much faster. So overall, what I'm trying to say here is Sony likes to put these big numbers on their speakers when it comes to battery life, but real-world numbers might not be as impressive. But personally, I do think the XG300 has a decent real-world battery life, and I also think the battery life on the Pulse 5 is decent just because it has this big light feature that it has to power. Now, when it comes to charging these speakers, all of these speakers charge via a USB-C port, and this USB-C port is the only port that you'll find on both the Pulse 5 and XE300, and unfortunately, you can only use these two speakers wirelessly. However, with the XG300, it does have an audio jack and it also has a USB-A out port so that you can charge your own devices. Now, when it comes to Bluetooth connectivity, all of these speakers can be connected to two devices at the same time so that you and a friend can both be DJ. All of these speakers have zero latency across the board when watching movies or videos on your phone, whether you're using an iPhone or an Android device. But when it comes to audio codecs, the Pulse 5 only has support for SBC. Whereas with both of Sony speakers, they have support for SBC and AAC, and they also have support for Sony's own LDAC, which is their own in-house high-res audio codec. Just keep in mind that if you do want to use LDAC, you do have to be an Android user, and if you do decide to use LDAC, that's also going to take its toll on the battery life.
But now let's talk about actually listening to music with these speakers. Regarding speaker setups, the Pulse 5 has the most unique setup here. It has an upward firing woofer, an upward firing tweeter, and a downward firing passive radiator that bounces sound off of the table. And due to this speaker's setup, if you want the best sound out of it, you should use it while indoors so that its sound has a ceiling to bounce off of. But then there's the XE300, which has dual frontward firing woofers and dual passive radiators. And then there's the XG300, which has dual frontward firing woofers, dual frontward firing tweeters, and dual passive radiators that shoot out the sides. Now, the good thing about having woofers and tweeters on both the Pulse 5 and XG300 is that it helps with instrument separation because the woofers handle the mids and the tweeters handle the highs. But so that you can see for yourself, let me just show you with the Charge 5, which also has a woofer and tweeter setup.
That we were meant to be. We kept running from the shadows in the night, realizing it was not worth the fight. Moving on alone was what felt right, 'cause we were never meant to be. Dum dum da dum day, dum dum da dum day, dum dum da dum day.
So like you may have just seen, the woofer handles the mids and the tweeter handles the highs. So this is going to help your speakers sound more open. But with all that being said, we're going to jump into the sound test. All of these speakers are playing with their stock EQs. Now both the Pulse 5 and XG300 are playing at 75% volume, but so that the XE300 can keep up, it's playing at 87% volume.
We were playing with fire. Everything turned to dust. When we aimed to fly higher, we got lost and dragged each other down. We kept running from the shadows in the night, realizing it was not worth the fight. Moving on alone was what felt right, 'cause we were never meant to be. Dum dum da dum day, dum dum da dum day, dum dum da dum day, 'cause we were never meant to be.
So first off, when it comes to sound signatures on these speakers, the Pulse 5 has a brighter sound signature and the Sonys have a warmer sound signature to them. However, I feel the Pulse 5 sounds decent enough with its stock EQ. But I still like to go in and raise the bass by 2 clicks and lower the treble by 1 click. But in general, I feel the Pulse 5 is still usable with its stock EQ. Whereas with both of Sony speakers, these speakers just sound too warm to the point where they can just sound muffled. So with Sony speakers, you have to go and lower their bass and raise their mids and treble. But even still, they continue to sound a little muffled. Now when it comes to the actual physicality and the bass, the Pulse 5 has the least amount of kick in its bass, and that's because the speaker has a single passive radiator, and it's a little smaller than the passive radiators found on these other two speakers. Whereas the XG300 is obviously going to have the most amount of bass because it's simply larger. But when it comes to max volume, the XE300 is just the quietest speaker here. This is a speaker that you're going to have to use at higher volumes on a regular basis, and as a result, that's going to drain the battery life faster. Now the Pulse 5 gets decently loud for its size and it gets loud enough for indoor use, but for outdoor use it can leave you wanting a little more. And finally, there's the XG300. Obviously, since this is the largest speaker here, it's going to get the loudest as well. And since it's a frontward firing speaker, this speaker is going to be better for outdoor use than the Pulse 5 because you can aim the music directly at you. But since we're on the topic of sound, I do have to point out that the Pulse 5 no longer has onboard media controls on it. So if you want to pause your music, adjust the volume, or skip through your music, you're gonna have to do that directly from your phone, which isn't always the most convenient. Whereas with Sony speakers, they both still have their onboard media control buttons. And you know, I'm very upset that JBL did this because having media control buttons on your speaker is very basic.
But finally, let's talk about pairing these speakers up with other speakers. Now, the JBL Pulse 5 is using JBL's Party Boost, meaning that you can pair it up to other JBL Party Boost speakers, like either a Boombox 3, a Boombox 2, an Extreme 3, a Charge 5, a Pulse 5, a Pulse 4, a Flip 5, or to a Flip 6, and you can pair up to 100 speakers together, which is obviously just overkill. Now, if you're going to be mixing and matching speakers, then your speakers are only going to play in sync. If you want to get left and right stereo sound going, you need to have 2 of the exact same speakers. So if you want to get left and right stereo sound going with the Pulse 5, then you're going to need another Pulse 5. Unfortunately, if you were to pair a Pulse 5 to a Pulse 4, they're only going to play in sync. And also, keep in mind, you can't pair any of JBL's smaller Party Boost speakers to any of JBL's larger Party Box speakers. But then there's the XG300 and XE300. Now, both of these Sony speakers are using Sony's Party Connect, meaning that you can pair them up to other Sony Party Connect speakers, like either an XG500, XG300, XE300, or XE200, or you can also pair them up to either the XB43, XB33, or XB23. And again, you can have up to 100 speakers paired together, which is obviously just overkill. And again, if you're going to be mixing and matching speakers, then your speakers are going to automatically play in sync. If you want to get left and right stereo sound going, you're going to need 2 of the exact same speakers. However, the thing that Sony's Party Connect does have going for it is that you can pair your smaller Sony Party Connect speakers to any of Sony's larger box speakers, like either an XP500, XP700, or even the XV900. And there's also the soon-to-be-released Sony XV500. And also keep in mind, with both JBL's Party Boost and Sony's Party Connect, you can't pair any of these speakers to older speakers that are using older speaker pairing protocols. So for example, you can't pair any of JBL's Party Boost speakers to any of JBL's older speakers that are using JBL Connect Plus. And with Sony's Party Connect speakers, you can't pair them to any of Sony's older speakers that are using wireless party chain. Now overall, Sony's Party Connect is very accommodating and it gets the job done. But personally, this is not my favorite speaker pairing protocol out there because it can be a hassle to use. First off, with both the XG300 and XE300, in order to use Party Connect, you have to open up the app, which is just an extra step that wasn't there before. But also, sometimes it can take forever to get these groups going, and sometimes not all of your speakers get paired up on the first try. So you have to go through the pairing process multiple times. And sometimes echoes do form. Now, Party Connect, it does correct these echoes after a while, but it's only a matter of time before that echo comes back. Whereas with JBL's Party Boost, it just works. You just press one button on each speaker, they'll automatically start looking for each other and they'll sync up, and they do so very quickly, and skipping is never an issue. So personally, I do think that if you plan on buying multiple speakers and if you plan on constantly pairing them together, I do think JBL is the way to go because Party Boost is just much easier to use. And personally, I just dread any time that I know that I have to pair my Sony speakers together to get B-roll because I know it's going to be a hassle.
So with all that being said, if you're trying to choose between these three speakers, personally for me, the Sony XE300 is a hard pass because sound quality wise, it sounds very muffled and it is rather quiet for its size. The JBL Flip 6 easily outperforms the Sony XE300 and it is significantly smaller. Now, if you're trying to choose between the Pulse 5 and XG300, the Pulse 5 is an all-around good speaker, but you're mainly paying for the light feature because sound quality wise, speakers like the Flip 6 and Charge 5 both sound better than the Pulse 5, all while being more affordable and smaller. And even though the Sony XG300 isn't my favorite speaker out there because of its super warm sound signature, when compared to the Pulse 5, the XG300 would be the better choice regarding sound quality and practicality. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit the like button and get subscribed. If you want to pick any of the products up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch. I made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And you know I can be very particular, so I'll only slap my name on something if I'm really proud of it.